Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar, Beginner's Guide to Everyday Biking. This is the second in a series of biking webinars focused on transportation and commuting options presented by Transaction Associates. My name is Sophia Gallimore and I'm a program manager at Transaction Associates, and I will be the moderator of today's webinar. Joining me are my colleagues Kelly Sachi and Courtney Goldberg. They both will be assisting with the facilitation of our webinar. If this is your first time joining one of our webinars, Transaction Associates is a full-service transportation consulting company based in Woburn. We operate regional groups called TMAs, or Transportation Management Associations, and work with individual clients to manage their on-site transportation programs. Everything we do is centered around decreasing traffic congestion and improving air quality by reducing the number of people who drive alone. We also have a division of our company that operates shuttle services. Today, you will hear from Galen Mook, the Executive Director of MassBike and your statewide bicycle advocacy organization. Before taking the helm at MassBike, Galen worked at Landry's Bicycle for 5 years and helped to start up the Hubway bike share company, now known as Blue Bikes. Though he does work on an abundance of issues, including policies, legislation, funding concerns, education, and more, Galen particularly enjoys working towards conveying the basics of biking and bike safety with the intent of breaking comfort barriers and to get more individuals riding bikes daily. This everyday webinar is geared towards sharing knowledge so that you can feel empowered to take your daily commute safely into your hands. So before getting started, we just have a few housekeeping items. Throughout the webinar, we encourage interaction by using the chat or the questions on the right side of your screen. That's on the right sidebar of your screen. We will try to answer all of your questions during the webinar. This webinar will recorded and you will receive a follow-up email with a link to the recording so that you can share with others or watch again at a later date. There will also be a short survey in the email that we hope you will complete. So let's get started and welcome Galen.
Excellent, thank you, Sophia, and all of Transaction. I'm gonna go ahead and start sharing my screen. Let me see if I can make this seamless. Are you able to see the presentation?
Yes.
Excellent. Is there a chat box in the middle of it?
No.
Hope not.
Galen.
Okay, great. So I'm just going to roll ahead. I don't believe I can see myself, so if there's anything that I need to do to modify the visuals, please do let me know. And I'll be keeping an eye on the chat just the same. Thanks, Sophia, and everybody at Transaction for having me here today. We're going to talk about everyday cycling basics. These will be tips and tricks that'll get you riding. It's kind of the intro to thinking about commuting once we come back to work, or if you're going to go and run some errands or just tote around town, or even for fun or for fitness. And a little bit about MassBike. We do statewide work, but I do like to do the very hyper local stuff. So if you have any questions about your riding in particular, maybe it's a route, a type of bike, a certain challenge that you're facing, or if you want to just share any experiences with us at MassBike, I fully encourage you to reach out at any time, just massbike.org, and my contact info will be at the end of the presentation, and I'll ask Sophia to share that as well after the fact. But we are here to help you get riding more bikes more often. So whatever we can do to do that, please keep in touch. All right, what we're going to talk about today, it's a pretty packed presentation. So I'm going to go pretty quickly, but again, feel free to use the chat to interrupt. And we have some folks from Transaction who just please interject if there's anything that pertains to what we're talking about, because I want to make sure that I'm getting the information out to people who are requesting it in real time as much as possible. So today we're going to talk about finding the right bike and the different types of bikes that are out there. We'll talk about safety equipment, the must-haves and the maybe you should-haves for equipment for your bike. We'll talk about locking up to make sure your bike doesn't get stolen. We'll talk about carrying stuff. So if you're going to the grocery store, maybe you're going to and from work. We'll talk about the multimodality that can come with bikes. And by that, I mean bikes and trains or bikes and buses, so that you don't have to ride 100% of the time both ways. You might be able to think about riding as a portion of the trip. We'll talk about routes and best practices of bike lanes. We'll talk about rules of the road, and we'll end with some safety tips to avoid crashes. Now, I do want to preface the last part by saying that crashes are not common, but typically that is why people are chiming in here to learn some of the tips about avoiding crashes. So I save it for the end, so I'm not scaring anybody off, but just to let you know, we will be covering some of the kind of more intimidating parts about riding out there in traffic. All right, so to start, I like to kind of gear this presentation into 3 different bucket terms that stand comfort, knowledge, and awareness. Now, those 3 terms is how I philosophically think about bike education. And what I mean by that, for comfort, for instance, your riding should be comfortable. We should find ways of making your ride as fun, as pleasurable, and as pleasant as possible. And comfort doesn't necessarily mean cushy. I mean, some people do like to push themselves. If you're going to ride 100 miles or climb up some steep hills, you know, comfort might not be the right term, but it's what you're looking for in a ride is something that does not cause undue concern. And comfort could be the type of bike that you're riding, to the size of the bike, to the clothes you're wearing, to the road you're riding on, to the weather you're riding in. Comfort is, in my opinion, the goal of riding. Knowledge, that's kind of where I come in for this presentation, at least. My goal here is to present a lot of knowledge for you, and then you can use that knowledge to make choices to make your ride comfortable. We'll talk about different types of bikes, different types of routes, different tips and tricks to make sure that you can ride safe and comfortably. And awareness, that's another kind of catch-all bucket term. Awareness is kind of my zen of riding. I think of bicycling as kind of a 6th sensory experience. You need all 5 of your senses engaged, including your sense of time and your sense of premonition. So the idea, and I guess the sense of balance. So we got to keep in mind that all of your senses are active at the same time. Now that means if you're tired or you're hungry or you're thirsty, you need to be aware of that so you can solve the problem, eating a Cliff Bar, drinking some water, or finding some other, yeah, that's great, and finding some other ways of getting around some of those barriers. It also means that if you're unaware for a couple of your senses, say you're riding with headphones, for instance, you're cutting off one of your most important points of being able to tell what's coming from behind you, for instance. So being aware, and it is kind of a little bit of like, we're gonna go from the subconscious to the forefront. I'm gonna tell you a lot of information today, some of which you know, some of which you don't know, and you're gonna be thinking about this information when you ride, but ideally with awareness, again, very zen, all of that starts to become kind of subconscious. So for instance, we'll talk about avoiding dooring, or if somebody opens a door from a parked car. So I'll remind you that, you know, you might want to look for tailpipes that have just recently turned on, or tail lights that have turned off, or a head in the window. And every car you pass, if you're new to this, you'll be thinking, oh, is that door going to open? Is that door going to open? But over time, that really does become subconscious. And your body almost in premonition will avoid that pothole or avoid that car door just almost magically. But in order to make that happen, you need to be aware. So these are my 3 key terms: comfort, knowledge, and awareness. Before we get jumping, I'll ask if Kelly or Courtney, if you want to run the first of the polls.
Sure. So we are going to ask a couple polls throughout this presentation. So our first one is, why do you choose to ride your bike? Please select all the reasons that apply. To commute to/from work, to enjoy the outdoors and clear my head, to exercise and work my muscles, to run errands, into the store, and nope, I don't really ride my bike. I'll leave this open for about 20 seconds. I'll give you all a couple of chances to select all the reasons that you guys choose to ride your bike.
Mm-hmm.
Get a couple more answers in there.
Excellent.
Okay. Well, looks like we're teetering off, so we'll go ahead and close this poll. Oh. Okay, and so here are our results. So a lot of you guys just to enjoy the outdoors and clear my head. It is quarantine time, so.
Great.
All right, great. Back to you, Galen.
All right, thank you, Kelly. Appreciate it.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And
Did you
thanks,
want to
everyone.
do, I'm sorry, did you want to do how comfortable you are out on rides?
Yeah, let's go for that one too. That would be good to
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. So go ahead and launch this one real quick. How comfortable are you out on rides? I'll ride any road and know how to stay visible and safe. I ride only on the quiet roads around my neighborhood. I stick to rail trails and multi-use pathways, and no way am I getting out there.
It's
So
totally fine. That's understandable.
yeah. So again, we'll leave this poll open for about 20 seconds, let you guys get a chance to pop back over and answer some. All right, perfect. Any last minute responses? Okay. We'll go ahead and share these results. So 35% split between I ride only on quiet roads around my neighborhood and I stick to rail trails and multi-use pathways. And then some of you guys are, just 29%. I'll ride on any road and know how to stay safe and visible. So no one said that they're not getting out there. So I love it.
Excellent. Got a good batch. Thank you so
Yeah.
much. Should we keep going or do you want one more?
I do have under normal conditions, how often do you bike to work?
Ooh, let's save that one for a little bit later.
Perfect.
Okay, great. Awesome, so this is good. So most of you sound like you've already got bikes. You're already riding. I definitely understand the riding on rail trails and quiet streets. That's the more pleasurable. Again, that's the comfort. But we'll talk today about kind of the variety, especially if you're going to start commuting to work. You sometimes need to hop out on the road. So there will be some times when you're out of your comfort zone. So we'll talk a little bit about that today. All right, let's see if, there we go. Great. So in terms of what types of bikes that are out there, the next couple slides are just the bikes, the variety of bikes. Now these are general buckets, and of course bikes can be on a spectrum, but we'll talk about what you're really looking for if you go to a bike shop, kind of how they're broken out. So commuter bikes, these are very common that are out there, especially if you're just toting to work. These put your body in an upright position. Typically there's gears, so you can climb up hills a little bit easier. Typically, there's some extra fancy bells and whistles like fenders. You're going to want to have lights that are possibly integrated. It's a little bit of a heavier machine. And again, it's probably for not riding distance, but more for utilitarian purposes. Then you get something like a road bike, which obviously the body geometry is a little bit more hunched over, more perpendicular or horizontal to the road, which actually makes it a more of an efficient ride. Kind of changes the balance between the hip and the ankle and the knee, so you actually get a little bit more power per pedal stroke. Some nuances to road bikes are the wheels are a little thinner, which means that the tires are higher pressure, which is what we talked about at the bike ABCs of maintenance. It's less contact of rubber on the road, so it's more efficient rolling. Typically, there's not the extra weight like fenders and racks that are towards commuter bikes, and these are made for distance. If you were going to go out for the 30 or 50 or 100-mile ride, you'd want something like a road bike to take it out. They're much lighter weight, and there's different varieties of frames. You can get steel or aluminum or carbon fiber or even titanium. So know that there's a difference within all of these categories just the same. And of course, there's mountain bikes. The big difference with mountain bikes is the width of the tires and the knobbiness. These are made for off-road, for digging into dirt, for digging into grass. It's kind of a shorter wheelbase, which means it's a little less stable out there, but it's made for kind of whipping around, more handling, and less kind of efficiency. Your body is upright. The bars, the handlebars are more flat, so you have kind of like a what we call mountain bike style brakes. Typically it's full gears, and you can see on these two examples, at least there's some suspension on there. So you could have a front suspension or you could have a full suspension, which makes it a less efficient per pedal stroke power transfer. Some of that power goes into the shocks, but it allows you to roll over rocks, sticks, curbs, and all the kind of the debris in the way. These are good if you're going to do short trips in the city, if you want to pop some curbs or even, tackle a pothole or two. But again, shorter distance, these would be made for climbing more so than long distance. A couple other types of bikes, which you may or may not be familiar with. There's folding bikes. Folding bikes are great because they can kind of be the take anywhere bike. The bike I'm featuring here is a Brompton, and they all kind of fold a little bit differently, but the Brompton is a wonderful model. Made of steel is the frame. It's a very sturdy bike. And Beauty of the folding bike is that you can take it on transit, on the trains, on the ferries, on the buses without any limitations. Even if the bike racks are full, you can always bring it inside. You can take them on the green line, which in normal circumstances, the green line does not allow bicycles. You can ride one way. I have a folding bike that, if I go to a bar and I don't really want to ride home, I can call a ride share, fold up my bike, put it in the trunk, and be all set. So folding bikes are awesome, especially if you're going to be multimodal in your commuting. E-bikes. E-bikes can actually be any type of bike. They can be a hybrid bike, a mountain bike, a road bike, even a folding bike. You can get an e-folding bike. And what these are electric assist. So there's a motor integrated in with the bicycle. Handles just like a normal bike, it leans, it steers just like normal bikes. Typically there are gears, and I shouldn't say normal, I should maybe say analog, for instance. E-bikes are the fastest growing segment of bicycles that are out there being sold at bike shops. And a lot of that is because, one, it's relatively new technology, so it's getting people who otherwise wouldn't be able to ride or wouldn't want to ride other analog bikes. It gives them an opportunity to get over hills or go longer distances or maybe commute to work without getting sweaty. And the beauty of an electric bike is that it still mostly requires pedaling. There are some that are throttle based, but I'm going to encourage you to get the pedal assist kind, although get whatever you want. But the beauty is that even on a steep hill, when you're pedaling with an electric assist bike, feels just like you're riding on a flat. If you've never ridden an e-bike, I recommend going to a bike shop and testing them out, and you'll really understand that power transfer of your pedal stroke with the electric kick. These are, in my opinion, going to be much, much more common throughout the Commonwealth. MassBike is working on legislation that would define these. I will say there needs to be a little bit of advocacy, which I'm working on, but the idea is that these are kind of an undefined category in between mopeds and in between bicycles. But we're finding that municipality by municipality, these are allowed wherever bicycles are allowed for the most part. But if you're looking at getting an electric assist bike, either get in touch with us or ask around your local bicycle advisory groups to see where bikes, e-bikes are allowed or not allowed. Typically they're allowed wherever bikes are allowed. Cargo bikes and trailers are another option. These are kind of much for utilitarian purposes. You can see 3 different varieties here. There's a bunch of different types of cargo bikes. You can get racks for the front, racks for the rear. You'll see in the top right, that's the Dutch cargo bike, the bucket in the front. Typically those are electric assist as well because they're a little bit heavier, but these they don't bike like normal bikes. They don't ride like normal bikes. You're going to have to kind of get used to them. But these are amazing because they can replace the minivan. They can replace the car. And in all these photos, you can always replace the kids with like kitty litter or mulch or whatever if you're going to Home Depot. But the idea of you might be able to get around without a car, even if you got loads to haul. And I've stolen this slide from a family with biking presentation, so that's why these are full of kids. But different varieties here. You can get the cargo bucket bike that are specific to cargo at the top. The bottom left is a normal bike that's been modified with an extra cycle, so it's kind of an addition to a bike, so you can tote around the kids. Or the bottom right is the Burley trailer. It's a normal mountain bike with just a hitch, and you see these around a lot. A lot of folks will tote around kids up until a certain age or tote around their dogs, but that's kind of the easiest way to kind of modify your bike to make it a cargo bike. Again, there's a spectrum, I should say, of all different types of bikes, so your bike might fit somewhere in there. And one thing to remind you about is the blue bikes. These are the bike share bikes. So the idea here is these are bike share bikes that are spread throughout most of Transactions Associates' realm, but not everywhere. And I don't have the map as a slide, but you can go to Blue Bikes. For those of you who are unfamiliar, the way this works is that there's several hundred, actually I probably want to say several thousand different bikes spread out amongst 7 municipalities, I believe, so far right now, with hundreds of stations throughout Greater Boston. And it's a docked system where the bikes are stationed in a locked dock. You go to the dock, you unlock a bike if you're a member, and you can become a 1-day member, even a 1-ride member. You get a public bike, and you can bike it anywhere within the system, where you drop it off at another dock anywhere within the system. So it's a 1-way type of trip. The beauty of the Blue Bikes is that you don't need to worry about maintenance. You don't need to worry about owning your own bike. If you have concerns about living in an apartment that's a little small for bikes, or you're just kind of a casual user, or maybe you're a multimodal where you'll take the train in and then bike the rest of the way to work. If you have a bike station at the train station and a bike station at work, then you don't need to worry about having your own bike. If you haven't tried out the Blue bikes, they're pretty heavy. I will say they're 43 pounds. But the beauty is that they're easy to ride. They ride like tanks. They're very sturdy. They have integrated lights in the front and the rear. There's fenders for when it's wet. You won't get any mud or any water on you. They have baskets for carrying stuff. These are very much utilitarian bikes as well. It's kind of a mix between a mountain bike and a hybrid bike with the added weight for security and safety purposes. All right, so those are the different types of bikes. Again, it's a spectrum. Your bike might fit somewhere in there, but I think I might pause and see if there are any questions to bring up and to ask a poll of what style of bike do you have or do you ride at home?
Yeah, so we'll go ahead and start that poll. So what style or styles of bikes do you have at home? Please select all that apply. And then if you have bikes outside of this, feel free to use the chat as well. And then we'll also pause and take some more questions in the questions panel as well.
Okay.
Yep, so we're going to just leave this poll open for a little bit. And then looks like about half of you responding. So go ahead and close the poll here in a minute, get some last minute responses.
Great.
Okay, and close this out. And then we'll share our results. So it looks like pretty much everybody, most of the people, 40% have a commuter bike, and then followed up by 33% say they have a mountain bike, a road bike, and then we have a split tie between a folding bikes and cargo bikes.
Cool. And if there's anything we missed in there, because we are limited in how many bikes we wanted to throw out there, feel free to throw in the chat if you've got a tall bike or a cruiser bike or something more wacky.
Yeah, Galen, one of our attendees has a hybrid. So I don't know if do you want to talk about those at all?
Great question. I think the hybrid I would consider to essentially be like a commuter bike. So kind of, let's see if I can, oops, get back up to the commuter bike. Is essentially what I would call a hybrid. It's a mix between a road bike and a mountain bike. And again, it's a spectrum, but I'd say that a hybrid bike typically has multiple gears. Typically you're upright. The bars are typically flat bars as opposed to road bike bars, which are further down. So I would consider most hybrid bikes to be, quote, commuter. And I think the reason I phrased it as commuter in this presentation was to remind that we're going to be focusing on biking to work. Great. Should we move on?
Yep, absolutely.
All right. So you've got your bike. Great. I should also mention, if you're curious about any other style of bikes, test riding at your local bike shop is the best way to understand how a bike handles and the differences between the varieties. All right, so you've got your bike. What do you have to carry with you? The basics are helmets, lights, and lock. Now, in the modern COVID era, we also recommend a face covering as well. I don't like to use the word mask necessarily because it could just be a simple covering that's recommended by the governor, but I do recommend that now we're talking about must-haves. A face covering is a must-have if you're going to be out there, because there are other people who are riding or walking out there where you're riding, and you want to make sure, even if you're asymptomatic, if you're carrying the virus, that you want to make sure that you're doing the best that you can to prevent the spread. So that said, helmet is a must. I've got this funny little graphic up here about how to wear your helmet properly. The biggest go-tos of reminders is you want to have it over the forehead, have it strap around the ears, and have it buckled under your chin so that you're not strangling yourself. Pull my helmet out here. Helmets have a shelf life of about 5 years. So if you haven't replaced your helmet in about 5 years, you're going to want to get a new one. And if you can't remember when you bought it, there should be a sticker on the inside of the helmet that tells you when it was manufactured. If you've ever been in a crash or you've ever hit your head wearing a helmet, your helmet is compromised. This is just a piece of styrofoam and plastic, and it's designed to crack and fall apart. So if you hit your head, there might be a crack in it, which means that the helmet is not going to do what it needs to do to save your head from getting cracked. So get a new helmet. And also, helmets, like shoes, they'll fit different people for different sized heads. So I recommend getting a helmet that fits you and, testing it out at a bike shop. And if you're not comfortable in your helmet, you're not going to be encouraged to wear it. And a helmet does no good if it's not being worn. So wear your helmet. and make sure that it fits you and it's one that you like. A little nuance too about this helmet is that it's bright. So I like this one because it actually adds a little bit of, let's call it notice when I'm out on the streets. So I'm just that much more popped, especially versus that dark tarmac pavement. Lights, you may want to have lights in the daytime, but you have to have lights in the nighttime. It's at least a white light visible to 500 feet or more an hour before dusk. And what that means is that you have to basically treat it like you're a vehicle out there. I recommend a red rear light, although the law only requires a rear reflector, but I do recommend a rear light as well. I also recommend getting a USB rechargeable kind so that you're not wasting money on batteries, and they typically stay pretty bright. There's a whole bunch of different types of lights that are out there, different lumens, different brightness. There's the flashing or settings that'll have it on solid. Really depends on personal preference, but at minimum, you need a white front light and a red rear reflector, probably a red rear light as well, and then side reflectors too, which should be on your bike or on the wheels of your bike. And then for a lock, I recommend a strong U-lock. We'll talk about bike theft in a little bit, but the idea of don't rely on a cable lock for your bike. I recommend a very sturdy U-lock like one pictured here, which can't be cut with bolt cutters. Something very secure and sturdy. These are the musts every time you ride: helmet, lights, and locks. Although, to be honest, if you're not going to leave your bike somewhere, you might not need a lock, but maybe we'll say helmets, lights, and face covering. Additional stuff to have in case you like. I would recommend highly that you bring some hydration, so a water bottle and a water bottle cage for your bike or bag to carry it in, because you're going to want to hydrate. A bell is also a really nice touch. You could get away with making it audible by saying on your left, or otherwise just verbally saying something. But you gotta let people know when you're passing. So a bell is a really nice way to do it. I recommend on this bike, we have fenders. We also have a pannier for carrying stuff, which is also recommended if you're gonna be commuting. And then a mirror. I personally don't ride with a mirror, but a lot of people do. A mirror is nice because you can see what's coming from behind you, but I will say that mirrors have blind spots. So whether you have a mirror on the helmet or a mirror on the handlebars, you're still going to want to double check by turning and using your peripheral vision to see what's coming from behind you. There's a whole bunch of other varieties of things that you can have, accoutrements and accessories for your bike. Feel free to pump in the chat some things that you take on your bike ride. These are a little bit more optional, but I'm curious as to what makes your ride, again, that much more comfortable when you're out there. Cool. Moving ahead, we talked about this last webinar, but you're gonna have to do basic maintenance on a regular basis. And what I mean by that is get familiar with how the A, the B, and the C, the air, the brakes, and the chain work on your bike. You're gonna wanna pump your tires, maybe once a week if you ride every day, at least put 10 or 20 PSI in, because air does leak out the valves. You're gonna wanna check the conditions of your tires pretty regularly too, so that you can notice any wear or any bulging in the tube before you get a flat. You're gonna wanna check your brakes to make sure the cable is tight. You can use that barrel adjuster that we talked about, which is a little barrel along the cable line when you can unscrew to tighten your brakes, and check the condition of your brake pads because they will wear out. You will need to replace them, or a bike mechanic maybe will need to replace them. And you're gonna wanna check your chain to make sure it's clean and lubricated. If your chain's gunky, like the chain is right here, it's gonna affect how you shift. It's gonna impact the wear of the teeth and the wear of the chain. And if your chain gets so worn down so it's wiggly, it could skip over teeth and cause a problem. It could even break on you. I'm guilty of that, of letting a chain go so bad that it snapped on me mid-ride, which caused me to crash. It was not a good deal. So make sure your A, your B, and your C are all up to speed. We can talk a little bit more about that offline, or feel free to get in touch with your with your local bike shop to know their tips and tricks. But these are stuff that you should do at your house pretty regularly, and then anything else you want to bring to your bike shop to have a professional mechanic check out.
Galen, I have a question.
Please.
One of our attendees wanted to know if bike shops are still doing test rides, given the current environment.
Excellent, good question. The shorter answer is you should call up ahead of time and see what their protocols are. The longer answer is that We have a list of bike shops on our website. If you go to massbike.org under the resources tab, we've got the entire 120 list on the site, and any major modifications that they're making in terms of customer interaction. It's about 2 weeks old at this point. We're cycling through, calling all the shops to see how their protocols are changing. But I will say that we advocated pretty strongly to make bike repair considered an essential service. So statewide, so we actually had to work with the governor's team to kind of augment their order. So bike shops are allowed to stay open if they provide bike repair. But in order to do so, they are taking sanitization practices. I think most bike shops are doing test rides. They just clean off the bike in between each ride. So there's lots of rubbing alcohol involved and lots of sanitizer involved. But from my understanding, my local bike shops in the Boston area are still doing test rides, yeah. But always call ahead just to see what the protocols are, because sometimes it's no customers in the shop. So you'll describe what you'll like, and they'll bring the bike out to you on the curb. Or there'll be some other distancing protocols. But I would say most likely, yes, you can still go and test ride, because, I mean, frankly, you're not going to want to buy a bike if you haven't ridden it. And bikes are hot commodity these days. So excellent. Very good question, though. I really appreciate that. All right, moving ahead. We'll talk about what to wear when you're out there. Really, I don't really care what you wear. If it's comfortable, it's fine. Couple of tips, though, I will say. We are in New England, which means that the weather changes every 15 minutes. So I recommend having layers, you know, an outer layer and some inner layers, so that when you ride and you get a little hot, you can take a layer off, or if it's cool, you can put a layer on. Plan for about 10 minutes into your ride. I always like to think, oh, where will I be in 10 minutes? Will I have climbed a hill? Will I be in the baking sun? And know that you'll warm up into your ride. So I like to start, especially in the springtime or early fall, I like to start by actually riding a little cooler and warming up into my ride. But I have a pretty quick metabolism, so it really depends on the person. I do recommend synthetic fabrics as opposed to cotton. Same rule as if you're hiking. You don't want to head out in the whites for a multi-day camping trek and being in cotton socks and a t-shirt. You want something that'll wick the moisture away from your skin, be it Lycra or some other synthetic or wool. And I do recommend bright colors, especially if you're going to be riding in traffic. Again, it's kind of like the brightness of my helmet. This goes a long way for being noticed out there on the roads. A lot of bike materials, bike-specific clothing have nuances of little flares, of reflectivity, of high vis, which technology has come a long way in a short amount of time. You can be visible from, honestly, a mile away if it's a flat road, if you're wearing high vis, and it's just wise when you're out there. But that said, mostly I ride in jeans and a flannel like 95% of when I'm riding around. So it's comfortable for me, I'm good at it. So, you know, different people, different nuances. I will say though that if you're biking into work, once you start biking into work, you might want to think about having a change of clothes at work, because it is nice if you're ever caught in foul weather, or if you want to push yourself on your ride, you've got a change of clothes. You don't need to sit all day in your riding clothes. Or, you know, you can clean up when you're at work too. Baby wipes are really nice. If you've got an employer who has a public shower for employees, that's great. That's like top tier employer right there. So congratulations, you should be a bike friendly business. So, you know, there are different options of finding ways around the barriers, just so you know that there's some tips out there. But again, it's up to everybody's individual comfort level. Cool. And we'll talk about locking your bike. This is the end of trip considerations. You're going to want to make sure that your bike is secure. If you have an employer who has a covered bike rack, that's also top-notch, bike-friendly employer, congratulations. But more often than not, especially if you're running errands, you're going to be locking out in public on the street. So I'll give you a second to take a look at this Linus bike right here and let you think, what is wrong with how this bike is locked? Well, frankly, the bike isn't locked, only the wheel is locked. So a bike thief can come with a 15mm wrench, unscrew the wheel, and walk away with the bike, and you've just lost your bike. Actually happened to me in reverse. I've lost a wheel out there. So you really need to be keen to make sure that your bike is locked in the frame, within the triangle of the frame. in my A and B diagrams, there's two, arguably maybe a little bit over the top ways of doing it. You can get a major steel U-lock like I was talking about earlier, and then a secondary cable lock for your wheels. Or you can go the hardcore route and actually remove a wheel. If you're good at removing a wheel and putting it back on securely, you can actually take your wheel off and kind of lock it together if you're going to leave your bike somewhere for multiple hours, especially in a high trafficked area. We don't have that much bike theft in the Boston area, compared to say New York City, but it's happened to me. And I believe, I don't know, Kelly and Courtney, do we have a bike theft poll? Yeah, let's go run this poll. I'm curious to hear how many of you have actually had a bike stolen before, which is heartbreaking, I know.
I know. So again, we'll leave this poll open for about 20 seconds, let you guys pop back over to the webinar and answer this. Have you ever had your bike stolen, yes or no?
Cool. And I will say, while people are filling out their poll, a couple other considerations for locking up. Try to find a bike rack, not a pole or not a bus shelter sign or something, because a bike rack has been cited by city planners to make sure that a bike is not going to be blocking the right of way, blocking handicap access or fire exits or anything. God forbid your bike is the reason that people can't leave a burning building. Or if you are in the spot where there aren't bike racks, which again, let us know and we'll advocate for bike racks to be put in your municipality, but takes a while. Make sure whatever you're locking to is secure. And this is a real story I like to tell. I'm sorry if you've heard me tell it before, but for those of you who remember the movie The Town, which was a kind of a shoot 'em up movie with Ben Affleck filmed in the North End in Charlestown, they did a lot of car chase scenes. In order to film those scenes, they had to remove the bus stop signs to do the filming. When they put the bus stop signs in, they didn't cement them back into the ground. So bike thieves would go and sit across the street, watch people lock their bike to unsecured posts and go inside to go get a piece of pizza or something. Bike thief would come out, pull the pole out of the ground and walk away with a bike. There was like 200 bike thefts in a course of a couple of weeks in Charlestown in the North End, all because people were not checking to see if their pole was actually secure to the ground. So do due diligence and give it a shake to make sure that what you're locking to is secure.
Yep.
All right.
So go ahead and share those poll results real quick. So 76% of you have not had your bike stolen. 24% of you have had your bike stolen.
Excellent. Yeah, I've had a bike stolen too. It's one of the most heartbreaking things. You can also use your homeowners or renters insurance to cover a cost of a bike that is stolen. Most likely, check with your insurance provider, but for the most part, it is covered under homeowners and renters, which is another reason to have homeowners and renters insurance. All right. Let's see, moving on. Multimodal commuting. So how do you get there? You can get there by bus, you can get there by train, you can get there by ferry. Most are fully functional to have your bike come with you at all points in time, except for the subways, the T. There are limits in terms of the commuter hours, so not during the commuter rush in the morning between 7 and 10, and not in the evening between 4 and 7. Same for the commuter rail, except if you're going opposite the flow, then there's no restrictions. If you have a folding bike, like we mentioned earlier, you can bring that at any time of day, no problem whatsoever. But the point of this is that there's a little bit of maybe homework to be done to know what route for the bus or what route for the ferry, but there are ways of making it so you don't need to ride both ways 100% of the time. And in a little bit, I'll turn the mic over to the transaction team to talk about some of the ride home as well. But there's ways of getting around if it's a major problem that you can actually find some support to make your way back so you don't need to ride both ways. All right, let's talk about planning your bike ride. So there are a couple of resources here to get to that comfort level of making sure that your route is good for you. Now, depending on where you live and where you work, I would recommend checking Google as like a first step. Google Maps is a little bit out of date because we're really getting new infrastructure popping up more and more. But it's a good baseline, and they even have biking maps, and you could actually plot your route, and it'll even give you the elevation of your route. So you can find the flattest route, or if you want to challenge yourself, you can find a hilly route. I recommend finding a route that you enjoy, and if you don't enjoy the road that you're on, maybe go a couple blocks one direction or another. We are a region of cow paths, so it's not necessarily just go one block up, but there are different routes that you can explore. And I do recommend finding quieter streets. And I will actually see if maybe Kelly or Courtney or Sophia want to talk a little bit about the Commuter platform and let folks know that there's resources there to share.
Sure. So ecommuter.org is a ride matching database that assists with finding bike partners, walking partners. It assists you with finding the most friendliest bike route, as well as, I think a couple of slides back, you can also find your blue bike stations there. You can find your park and pedal locations. All of that is located in ecommuter.org. All you have to do is just go out there, register yourself, and start planning.
Cool. And check out ecommuter.org. And I think I've got the slide up of the homepage. So there's tons of resources here. Check it out, and great for Transaction for providing all of these resources to you too. Everybody's commute is going to be a little bit different, but you might find a nice commuter buddy to ride with.
Exactly.
All right, cool. Let's talk a little bit about bike infrastructure. So while you're planning your route, you should know where on the route will you get the varieties of bike lanes. On a route or even on a single road, you'll get a few different types. So let me go through what we have on this slide here. On the top left is called a sharo, which essentially means share the road, which doesn't really do much, except it reminds drivers that a bicyclist will be more or less in the roadway. And it reminds bicyclists to ride a little bit further out from parked cars, which is important. We'll talk about in a second. Top right, you have a bike lane with a little bit of a paint buffer in between the parked cars and the bike lane. Even though it makes the biker a little bit closer to the travel lane, it's a little bit further out in case doors open up. I will say though that painted bike lane doesn't really do much from keeping drivers out of the bike lane, especially Ubers and Lyfts and taxi cabs. As you can see right here, this is downtown Boston, and it's a pretty convoluted scene. The bottom right is a parking protected bike lane, which is really nice. It's a cheap or low cost, quick infrastructure fix to make a physical separation between the biker and the travel lane, where parked cars are the physical separation. And the bottom left is a fully separated sidewalk level bike lane, which here it's on Vassar Street by MIT in Cambridge, but you're seeing this as kind of the gold standard pop up more and more. So depending on where you're working, and I know Transaction is kind of all throughout Greater Boston, you're probably, if our advocacy is successful, going to see a lot more of these separated sidewalk level bike lanes popping up. And the idea is to build a network of them. So if you choose to, you can ride fully protected, although each type of infrastructure has its pros and has its cons. The share road, you're sharing a road, but you can get to go a little bit faster, maybe the speed of traffic on a slower street. Whereas, for instance, on a protected bike lane sidewalk level, you're going to get pedestrians meandering into your bike lane. So you're going to have to ride a little bit slower and be pretty vigilant about ringing your bell. Cool. Oh, no, that's the wrong slide there. Sorry, that was for another presentation. And we'll talk a little bit about left turns and bike boxes, which is kind of a nuanced, relatively new type of infrastructure as well. I have its own slide here because it's kind of a weird one. If you look at the way to make a left turn, the center one, the middle one, the two-stage left, it's designed so if you're biking, you go straight, and then you turn your bike at the intersection, then you go straight again, so you're not actually crossing over travel lanes. And the photos of this right here are actually from Binney Street in Cambridge. Cambridge is kind of at the forefront of putting out a lot of different varieties of infrastructure. So you're going to see something like a green box, which is designed for a bicyclist to wait until they get a green light. And again, the goal here is so that if you're making a left turn, you don't need to be like a motorist would, which would be in the center of an intersection. This really does allow you to be more separated out from traffic. And then off-road pathways, of course, I'm going to talk a little bit Cambridge specific in a second, but the idea here is that look for the off-road pathways. For most of you are comfortable on the off-road pathways. They might not connect fully, but you can get pretty darn close to where you're going. For instance, I know that Watertown is working on their community path extension to go up into Fresh Pond, which would then connect up to the Minuteman, which then goes all the way out to Bedford. And then on the way in, it connects to the Somerville Community Path. We're looking at hundreds of miles of rail trails and off-road pathways that will interconnect. So keep an eye out for some maps that are happening are some connectivity and some of the key junctions that will happen to bring everybody into the network. And ideally, if our advocacy is successful, you will be just a short hop from the network. So from your home, you can ride and hop on the pathways, which will get you hopefully on your way to work. I'll take a pause here, and I know that we got one more poll to send out at least of your who is currently riding or planning to ride to work.
We have a poll under normal conditions. How often do you bike into work? We'll go ahead and leave that open again for about 20 seconds and let you guys just fill in those answers for us.
Great.
Okay, still getting some answers coming in, so we'll leave it open for maybe about another 5 seconds or so.
Sounds good.
Okay, close that out, and then here are our results. So we have about half of you that have never biked to work, and then every once in a while it was second place with 20% of the vote, and then we have a tie for 13% with whenever it's nice out, and then maybe once ever.
Okay, cool. That's a good variety. I'm going to assume that a lot of you might not be biking to work due to traffic concerns. So the rest of this presentation is geared around quality of roads, stress levels of roads, and ways to avoid typical crashes. So let's just jump in. I'm going to use the city of Cambridge as my example, not because I'm centered there or your workplace is there, but because they have the best data that we're able to analyze. And this is kind of an example of ways to think about planning your route so that it's less stressful and maybe more pleasant. So here's a map of the city where we've rated the comfort level of the roadways from 1 to 5. You can see it's kind of varied. There's some green next to some red, next to some orange. So I've isolated out the off-street pathways and the lowest stress, low volume separated bike facilities. Granted, this is a few years old, so there's a couple pieces of infrastructure that are not on here, but you can see it's disjointed. And my point here is that there's separated gaps that you'll need to navigate. So if I do some infill, this is the stress level 1 and stress level 2 of places in the city that might not even have infrastructure. You'll see that then it starts to kind of knit together. So think about this on your route or maybe in your hometown of where might the low stress streets be. Now, actually, before I go there, notice that the arterials of Cambridge are not on here. And the arterials of Cambridge, the heavy trafficked roads, typically have the bike lanes. So what I'm looking at here is a lot of roadways that don't even have infrastructure. Bike infrastructure. So I'll ask this question here: what causes most serious bicycling accidents? Now, a lot of people are concerned about motor vehicles, but in reality, cyclists just slipping is the most common cause of a reported accident, let alone accidents or crashes that aren't even reported. So thinking about crashes, it really is that, the high majority, up to 75%, don't even involve any other rider or any other motor vehicle. So for the next 5 minutes, I'm going to talk about car on bike interactions, but I want you to have that in the back of your mind that it's not actually very common, even though they are kind of intimidating and scary. So again, back to the city of Cambridge. Beauty of Cambridge is that they map all of their crashes. So this is a 4-year time span of the hot spots of crashes. And obviously you can see it's around the arterials, especially around Inman Square. If I go one layer even deeper, you'll see that the city of Cambridge even has pinpointed on each block where each crash takes place. What I want you to get out of this slide is if you look at maybe Mass Ave and then 2 streets up, you'll have Broadway. Both are major roads, both have some sort of bike infrastructure, both have a lot of crashes, but there's a street that splits the middle, Harvard Street, which goes the same distance from Harvard Square to Kendall Square with very few crashes on it, which is because there's less traffic, there's not a business district, it's not a bus route or a truck route. And so what I want you to do is think about the streets that might not be common, might not be ones that you would drive or take transit on. Find the quieter streets, might not have a bike lane because they might actually be more comfortable and safer. So let's talk a little bit about avoiding car and bike crashes. The best way to think of it is that when you're on a bike, following the same tips and rules and responsibilities that you would if you were driving a car. Obey all the traffic laws. There are bike-specific laws in Chapter 85, Section 11B of the Mass General Law. And we're not going to go through this, but just so you know that there's some like very distinct laws about biking. And if you go to massbike.org, we have a synopsis of this that's much more digestible on our website. But let's break down 4 of the common crashes. I'll take a few minutes here just so I leave some time for Q&A. First, stop at the stoplights, stop at the stop signs, yield to pedestrians. Basic common knowledge, you all know this. Thank you for doing so. You are a beacon of shining examples of how responsible bicyclists can be out there. Major tip here, go with traffic. If you're new to riding, you might think, oh, riding into traffic makes me more visible, means I can see what's coming. Not true, not safe. If you look at this kind of arguably convoluted diagram, driver A and driver B are only looking where they're expecting traffic to be coming from. So if you're a wrong way bicyclists, you are not going to be noticed out there. Key is riding predictably. And that means when you're riding with traffic, ride with traffic. It's pretty obvious. A little bit less obvious is when you are riding, you need to hold your line. Riding predictably also means riding straight. Even if you've got a little bit of buffer between the moving traffic and the curb, if you pull away from moving traffic, you will need to kind of merge back out, which creates a conflict point with drivers behind you. So the best way to ride is straight and predictable. If you're going to deviate from your path, you're going to want to try to just hand signals before, but ideally just ride as straight and natural as possible. When you are choosing your line, make sure that line is out of the door zone. This one is tricky. A lot of on-street bike lanes are next to parked cars. And if you're next to a parked car, you are running the risk of being in the door zone. Car doors are about 3 to 4 feet wide. Bike lanes are 5 feet wide. The center of the stem of your handlebar to the edge of the handlebars is about a foot. So if you add all of those up, you really only have about 6 inches on the far edge of the white line, closer to moving traffic, where you're out of the door zone. This is a very serious crash. This is a very common crash. If you are ever in an incident where somebody opens up a door and strikes you, or you strike the door, please get a police officer on the scene. We have a bicycle bill that went through in 2009, which makes it illegal to open a door onto anybody in moving traffic. Whomever is the opener of the door is cited, which is very important for assigning fault in a crash. Even if you're not going to press charges or claim any damages, it's very important that this data point gets tracked. Going back to my slide a few slides ago about the data points from Cambridge, it helps me and my advocacy know where the incidents take place. But best even is to not even get in the crash in the first place. So the only way to avoid ever getting doored is to never ride in the door zone. The same advice goes for the right hook. This is a very serious crash as well. This happens when you're approaching an intersection and you're parallel to a moving vehicle and the driver makes a right. Maybe they don't see you in the mirror, maybe they don't look, and the crash happens. If I were this bicyclist, my way of avoiding this crash would be to merge in between the beige car and the blue car and put myself in the line of traffic and not parallel to traffic. If you're in front or behind the vehicle, you are never able to be right hooked. This is super important to emphasize if you're ever around a bus or a truck. Bus drivers and truck drivers have mirrors that are not designed for seeing immediately what's next to them. Buses have right mirrors that are pointed at their back right wheel so that they know when they've cleared a turn on a curb. They're not looking at what's actually in the travel lane and the bike lane next to them. This is incredibly important, especially in urban areas where there are lots of intersections and where there's lots of trucks and construction, or it's a bus route. And unfortunately, this is where most of the fatal crashes come from. It's unfortunate, but right hooks do happen. And it's not the fault of the bicyclist, but that's not the point. The point is to avoid this crash, and the best way to avoid it is to line up with traffic and not be parallel with traffic. Don't be in the blind spots. And my last tip here is going back to my left turns. Always do your hand signals, left turn, right turn, and stopping. If you feel safe, taking a hand off the handlebars to signal. But know that in a left turn, there's 3 different ways that I'd recommend making it. You can make it like a motorist would, which is merging in the left lane and turning when it's clear. You can do the 2-stage left, which we talked about a little while ago, which mostly what I do, a box turn is my most common left turn. Or if it's a really crummy intersection, don't feel bad about hopping off your bike and waiting for the pedestrian signal and just walking like you would a pedestrian. If you're on foot, you have full rights of a crosswalk, but if you're on your bike, you really do need to follow the rules of a motor vehicle. There's really no good gray in between, so make sure that if you're at a tricky spot, feel free to walk your bike. That is totally fine. Again, 4 tips. Ride with traffic, hold your line, make sure that line is out of the door zone, make sure that you're avoiding being right hooked by riding in line of traffic and not parallel to traffic at intersections, and think about the intersection so that you get the safest left turn as possible. Now, I know that we've ran through some pretty harrowing and kind of intimidating tips right there. So I want to remind you that most crashes are not car crashes, and most crashes are not happening with motor vehicles, and biking is still fun. I'm going to leave you with this slide here of Albert Einstein riding a bicycle to remind you that life is a lot like riding a bike. Must keep moving to maintain your balance, and biking is really fun. So don't be intimidated, even though we were just talking about some of the crashes. And I fully encourage you to stay in touch. Transaction is a great resource for you. Check out ecommuting.org. And I'll leave Sophia's email up here and my email too. And I realize that we are just rounding out the hour. We're just about to hit the top of the hour. So at that, I'm going to give it back to the folks at Transaction and say thank you for sticking around. And I really appreciate it. And I hope you got a lot out of this presentation.
Thank you so much, Galen. Maybe we have time for a quick 1 or 2 questions that asked.
Yes, thank you, Galen. One of the questions we got was, what kind of bike do you recommend for someone who hasn't ridden in a while? Maybe nothing that's too expensive.
Yeah, a nice entry-level hybrid bike is probably my recommendation. $400 is a good price point to make sure that you're not getting something out of Walmart, but yet has some backing of a real manufacturer. Again, my recommendation is to test ride. You can get an entry-level mountain bike, an entry-level road bike, an entry-level hybrid bike, but don't think that you can just walk up and just grab whatever bike is off the shelf. A bit like buying a pair of shoes, you're going to want to walk around in them first. You're going to want to ride a bike for a little while first. And most bike shops will have a 30-day guarantee. So if it doesn't work for you, if for some reason you find it's uncomfortable, you can probably return the bike at no extra cost and think of getting a different bike. But I would recommend generally a hybrid bike, which puts the body upright. Not necessarily good for a lot of miles, but it's mainly made for comfort, and it's got fully functional gears. And if it's been a couple decades since you've ridden like a new bike, technology has come leaps and bounds. Bike weight has gone down immensely, and componentry is way more functional than it used to be. So again, it comes down to talking to a local bike shop, and if you're finding that the bike shop you're interacting with is really not engaging the way that you want it to, you can always shop around a little bit, but it comes down to working with your local crew.
Great. And then do you have anything to recommend with respect to folding bikes or electric bikes?
Yeah, price points for them have come down quite a bit as well. I personally have a Brompton, which arguably is like the Cadillac of folding bikes, and it's a comfortable machine that's got like amazing gearing, so I can actually crank it pretty well, but they're pretty pricey. Other folding bikes, a Dahan is a more mid-level, D-A-H-O-N, is a mid-level folding bike. The Brompton is from London, it's B-R-O-M-P-T-O-N. And whatever your local bike shop sells, most bike shops have folding bikes these days. Same with e-bikes. Most manufacturers now are also having e-bike models. So an entry level might be a Raleigh, or even a Trek or a Specialized, which are probably the top brands in the country, do also have entry level e-bikes. But again, my recommendation is to test ride, test ride, test ride. And there's so many different varieties that are out there. It's gonna fit your body. Make sure that the bike fits your body. And if it's not comfortable, try a different bike. It's nothing to do with your body. The bike should be modified to fit you as opposed to you making compromises to a specific bike.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes. So we did go a few minutes over. I just wanted to thank everyone for hanging in there with us and joining us for our second in a series of biking webinars. This one again is Beginner's Guide to Everyday Biking. Once again, like to thank you, Galen. You are always so informative. And if there are any questions, you can definitely reach out to either Galen, the website is there, as well as myself.
Mhm.
Thanks,
Excellent.
everyone, and enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you all. I really appreciate the opportunity. Good to see you.
Bye.
Bye.